Earlier today, the Israeli military announced that Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, the architect of the October 7th terrorist attack, was killed in a firefight in southern Gaza. Now, this came after U.S. warplanes and B-2 stealth bombers yesterday attacked underground weapons facilities in Yemen, striking in areas controlled by the Iranian-backed Houthi terrorist group. Joining me now by phone to discuss this, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina. He serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Appropriations Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee, where he's the ranking member. Senator Graham, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you, Tony, very much.
So let me ask you this. Is this a game changer with the elimination of Sinwar, who was the mastermind behind October 7th and the leader of Hamas in Gaza?
Absolutely. It's a game changer. And hats off to our friends in Israel, the political leadership, Bibi in particular. But the IDF, the intelligence agency, is a major accomplishment. It's equivalent to killing bin Laden. It cuts the head of the snake off. Somebody may try to replace him, but Hamas is tremendously diminished. And why does it change the game? When you destroy Hamas militarily and politically, you have an opportunity to do in Gaza what we did in Germany and Japan, rebuild the place from extremists to people that can live in peace with their neighbor. So it does create a possibility for Arabs like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to come in and fill the vacuum created by the demise of Hamas, which would be great news for Israel because the UAE and Saudi Arabia are willing to live in peace with Israel.
Now, with Sinwar, I understand he had kind of veto power over the negotiations taking place regarding the hostages and a ceasefire. Does this change, kind of rearrange the geopolitical landscape there in the Middle East?
Potentially, I think. Now, in Bibi's speech just a moment ago, he was calling on people who have the hostages in custody that you'll get safe passage, you deliver the hostages. The question is, was Sinwar's brother killed? Will he take over? But the biggest loser in all of this is Iran. I've never believed the hostages would be released until there's a real diminishment of the influence of Iran. So with Hezbollah suffering losses of leadership and fighters in Lebanon, and now the killing of Sinwar, I think Iran's ability to use their proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, has been reduced. So you have an opening not only for the hostage deal, but to implement what I've been working on for a year and a half. As you remember, and you're one of the most well-informed people I know about the Mideast, the Abraham Accords, negotiated by President Trump, where 6 Arab nations recognized Israel, can be built upon. The ultimate Arab country to recognize Israel would be Saudi Arabia. I think the death of Sinwar makes that more likely than ever, and that's a nightmare to Iran for the Arabs to make peace with the Israelis. My hope is to kick Hezbollah out of Lebanon and to kick Iran out of Syria down the road. But I think October 7th was designed to prevent further reconciliation between the Arabs and Israel, building on the Abraham Accords. And so this is a big blow to Iran as well as to Hamas.
If that happens, if Saudi Arabia comes into a formalized relationship with Israel, then you have a united Arab front which stands against Iran and what they're trying to do in the Middle East, do you not?
Oh, you do, and that's the ultimate change in our lifetimes. The hope has always been for the Arabs to march toward the light away from the darkness. The Abraham Accords were historic. President Trump, with Jared Kushner and others, persuaded 6 Arab nations to not allow the Palestinians to have a veto. And they went ahead and made peace with Israel. You know, the holy sites of Mecca, Medina, and Saudi Arabia is the most influential country in the Muslim world.
Right.
If you could get MBS, who's inclined to do it, to recognize Israel and have diplomatic ties, then you've effectively ended the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is a nightmare for Iran. And again, I'll go back to October 7th. The intel is clear. One of the main reasons this attack occurred was to stop the march toward normalization between Saudi and Israel. A nightmare for Iran.
Let's talk about the Biden-Harris administration and their policy toward both Israel and Iran. Earlier this week, the Biden-Harris administration threatened an arms embargo to our ally Israel if enough, to their satisfaction, humanitarian aid was not flowing into Gaza. Your thoughts on that threat?
Well, number one, I think it's ill-timed, ill-conceived, and at every turn, the Biden administration has had one foot out and one foot in when helping Israel. This idea that Israel should not destroy Hamas militarily was stupid. They've been trying to hold Israel back from going into Rafah. They've been restricting weapons like 2,000-pound bombs. And Israel was smart enough and clear enough in their thinking to go into Rafah and destroy Hamas militarily, which they've virtually done. So the idea of withholding weapons at a time of critical momentum is absurd. I hope they revisit that policy, but I promise you there'll be a big pushback in the Congress because we appropriated money for these weapons. So you could have a conflict between the Congress and the Biden administration. And I think today is a game changer. And the best way to help the Palestinian people is to do what we did in Germany and Japan. Destroy the radical elements running those nations, the Nazis and the emperor worshippers in Japan, and over time de-radicalize the population. That's the only way to really help the Palestinians. And I would just add this. They're the most radicalized people on the planet, the Palestinians. They're taught from birth to death to kill the Jews, and that needs to stop.
Senator, I want to stay on the foreign policy front, but move to another issue in the Pacific. There's not, my 20 years in Washington, I've realized there's not that many members of Congress that are really, really well informed on foreign policy issues. You're one of them, so I'm going to try to squeeze out as much as I can when I talk with you. I want to play this clip of Kamala Harris from yesterday regarding Taiwan, clip number 9.
What is your position were there to be an invasion of Taiwan by the Chinese military if you were president at the time?
Well, let me restate the point I've made many times. I believe in the one China policy, and I believe that Taiwan has a right to defend itself.
Senator, you can do both?
Yeah. So here's the problem. When they pulled out of Afghanistan, it was the dumbest decision in modern American political history. It not only set in motion the comeback of ISIS in Afghanistan, they just arrested a guy last week, an Afghan refugee in America, being recruited by ISIS-K, now housed in Afghanistan, to attack us on Election Day. We've lost deterrence. So I think Russia invaded Ukraine because of Biden looking weak. And here's what Trump would do, I believe, if he wins, and I hope he does. He'll let the Chinese know we want to have a good relationship, but you do not want to invade Taiwan. You do so at your own peril. And what Biden did by taking nuclear-tipped cruise missiles out of our submarines in the South China Sea is to send a signal of weakness. So I don't really believe anybody in China is afraid of Harris, but I promise you they're afraid of Trump. And if you want to prevent spreading of war to Asia, elect Trump.
Speaking of the vice president, wide-ranging conversation, sometimes combative, that she had with Bret Baier, Fox News, last night. Do you think she won anyone over in that interview?
Yeah, that's a good question. Here's what I think. I've always thought the reason she won when Bret did a great job. He's a fair man. He asked good, hard questions. She gave, gibberish answers. How many illegal immigrants have been released into the country on your watch is not an unfair question. She couldn't answer the question because either she didn't know or she's embarrassed about the number. So I don't think she won anybody over. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to go on Fox and be the victim. And they're going to play that interview in the left and throughout the Democratic world to say she went into the lion's den and she stood up. I think that was the goal all along. And the truth of the matter is, if you're having to do that, you're in trouble. If those people need to be persuaded this late, you're in trouble. From an independent voter's point of view, if you watch that interview and you believe she's capable of leading this country, you're making a mistake. I think it just reinforced how ill-prepared she is to be president of the United States. I think it was a disaster for her.
Well, I think you're right in terms of especially sidestepping the immigration. I think she didn't want to answer the question because it shows the failure of the Biden-Harris administration. Senator, we're out of time. Always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for taking time to join us on this Thursday.
Thank you, Tony, and just thank you for what you've done for Israel, and to all the listeners, keep praying.